In the furthest reaches of the Andromeda Spiral, where ancient civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a legend whispered in the darkest corners of alien cantinas and carved into the sacred stones of forgotten temples. It speaks of a species so fierce, so unpredictably dangerous, that even their name became synonymous with madness itself: humans. For 10,000 cycles, the Galactic Council believed them to be nothing more than a cautionary tale, a myth created to frighten young ones into obedience. After all, what rational species would charge into battle without proper shields? What sane beings would sacrifice themselves for strangers? What creatures would look at impossible odds and smile? The Zephyrians, masters of quantum warfare, laughed at such stories. The Krillian hive, with their billion-strong swarms, dismissed them as primitive nonsense. The ethereal conclave, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical 4 millennia ago, considered such tales to be the fantasies of lesser minds. But legends, as the galaxy was about to discover, sometimes have a way of stepping out of the shadows and revealing themselves to be terrifyingly, impossibly real. When the first human ship materialized at the edge of Zephyrian space, scarred, patched, and broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't have existed, it carried with it something that would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. Proof that some myths are just sleeping truths, waiting for their moment to wake up and remind the universe why they became legends in the first place. The humans had arrived, and with them came the realization that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one everyone thought was just a story. Admiral HFY of the Zephyrian Third Fleet had seen many strange things in his 4 centuries of service. He had witnessed stars being born in the cosmic forges of the nebula kingdoms. He had watched entire worlds phase in and out of existence during the reality wars. He had even survived the Great Silence, when half the galaxy went dark for 3 solar cycles, and no one spoke of what they saw in that darkness. But nothing had prepared him for the sight that now filled his command screen. The vessel hung in space like a contradiction made manifest. It was clearly artificial, clearly built by intelligent hands, yet it defied every principle of galactic engineering that had been established over millions of years of interstellar civilization. Where Zephyrian ships were sleek curves of crystalline perfection, this thing was all angles and aggressive lines. Where proper starships glowed with the soft radiance of contained quantum fields, this monstrosity was dark, scarred, and patched with materials that his scanners couldn't even identify. Most disturbing of all, it was broadcasting. Communications Officer Villar, HFY's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect across a dozen star systems. "Are you certain these readings are accurate?" The young Zephyrian's gill slits fluttered nervously as he checked his instruments for the 7th time in as many minutes. "Admiral, I've run every diagnostic protocol in our database. The signals are definitely coming from that vessel, but..." He paused, his bioluminescent spots flickering with confusion. "Sir, they're using electromagnetic radiation." A shocked silence fell over the bridge. Electromagnetic radiation hadn't been used for communication in over 50,000 years, not since the discovery of quantum entanglement networks. It was like watching someone try to start a fire by rubbing sticks together when fusion reactors were commonplace. "That's impossible," whispered Science Coordinator Thekmose, her 7 eyes focusing independently on different readouts. "No species develops space travel without understanding basic subspace dynamics. You can't build a starship without quantum field manipulation. It's a fundamental requirement." HFY studied the alien vessel more carefully. Now that he looked closer, He could see that it wasn't just scarred, it was actively damaged. Hull breaches had been sealed with what appeared to be metal plates welded directly onto the outer skin. Entire sections showed signs of hasty repairs using materials that clearly didn't match the original construction. Most telling of all, one of its weapon ports was actively sparking, shooting brief flashes of electrical discharge into the vacuum of space. "Sir," Villeneuve's voice cracked slightly. "I'm receiving a transmission. It's in Standard Galactic." That was even more impossible than the electromagnetic radiation. Standard Galactic was a mathematical language developed by the Council specifically for first contact situations. No isolated species could know it without previous contact with galactic civilization. Yet this ramshackle vessel was somehow broadcasting in perfect Standard Galactic syntax. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything in Zexhi's experience. It was organic, definitely, but it had a rough quality that reminded him of gravel grinding against metal. More unsettling. It carried emotional undertones that seemed completely wrong for a first contact situation. There was weariness there, yes, but also something that sounded almost like amusement. "Zephyrian vessel. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the UES Indomitable. We're requesting safe passage through your territory and, if possible, directions to the nearest council station. We have wounded aboard, and our navigation systems took a beating in our last engagement." Zexhi exchanged glances with his senior staff. The alien's casual tone was disturbing enough, but the mention of an engagement raised immediate concerns. "Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Zexhi of the Zephyrian Third Fleet. Please state your species designation and your point of origin." There was a pause that stretched just long enough to make everyone on the bridge uncomfortable. When the voice returned, that note of amusement had grown stronger. "Species designation?" The alien, Chun, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Admiral, we're human. From Earth. And, judging by the way your ships are positioned, you've probably heard the stories." Thekmos made a choking sound. Several junior officers' bioluminescent patches began flashing in patterns that indicated extreme stress. Even Zexhi felt his gill slits flutter involuntarily. "Humans," he said slowly, tasting the word like it might burn his mouth, "are a myth, a legend used to frighten civilians." Well, Chin's voice carried that impossible amusement even stronger now. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Admiral, but legends have a way of being more real than people expect. We're very much here, very much alive, and very much hoping you'll point us towards someone who can help us get our people medical attention." Zexhi's mind raced. If this was some kind of elaborate hoax, it was beyond anything he'd ever encountered. But if it wasn't, if these actually were the mythical humans, then he was facing a situation that no Zephyrian officer had ever been trained for. According to the legends, humans were the galaxy's greatest warriors. They were said to be a species so violent, so unpredictably aggressive, that they had been banished from civilized space before the Council was even formed. The stories claimed they fought without honor, without proper protocols, and, most disturbing of all, without fear. They were said to be capable of incredible acts of both kindness and brutality, sometimes within the same battle. But those were just stories, weren't they? Captain Chun, Zexhi, said carefully, "Our records indicate that humans were removed from this galaxy approximately 10,000 cycles ago." Another pause. When Chun spoke again, her voice had lost some of its lightness. "Removed is a polite way to put it, Admiral. Exiled might be more accurate. But that's ancient history. We've been busy exploring other galaxies, learning new things, making new friends and new enemies. Recently, we've had some disagreements with a species called the Devourers. I'm guessing from your reaction that name means something to you." Zexai's blood went cold. The Devourers were the galaxy's nightmare, a hive-minded species that consumed everything in their path. They had appeared from dark space 5 cycles ago, and have been systematically destroying worlds ever since. The combined fleets of 17 different species had barely managed to slow them down. You've encountered the Devourers, fought, and recently defeated a major incursion in the Magellanic Clouds. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. But they're regrouping, and we have reason to believe they're planning a major push into this galaxy. That's why we're here. To warn you. You defeated the Devourers? Thekmos leaned forward, her 7 eyes wide with disbelief. A single ship defeated the Devourers? Chen laughed again, and this time there was no amusement in it at all. Science Coordinator, I'm reading your rank insignia correctly. We're not a single ship. We're the advanced scout for the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet. All 47,000 vessels are about 6 hours behind us. The bridge erupted in chaos. Officers began shouting readings and confirmations. Several junior staff members activated emergency protocols without authorization. Thekmos actually fell backward into her chair, all 7 eyes staring at the main screen in shock. Admiral, Chen's voice cut through the noise with surprising gentleness. I realize this is a lot to process, but right now we have injured crew members who need medical attention, and you have a galaxy that's about to face the biggest threat it's ever seen. Maybe we could table the existential crisis for later and focus on the immediate problems. Zexai fought to regain his composure. In 4 centuries of command, he had never faced a situation even remotely like this. First contact protocols existed, but they assumed contact with unknown species, not with mythical ones. They certainly didn't cover what to do when the mythical species claimed to be the galaxy's salvation. Captain Chun, he said finally, I'm going to need to contact the Council. This is far beyond my authority to handle. Of course. But, Admiral, while you're making your calls, could you point us toward the nearest medical facility? We've got 3 crew members in critical condition, and our medical bay was damaged in the last fight. Zexai looked at his tactical display. The nearest Council medical station was Helios Base, only 2 hours away at maximum acceleration. But bringing these alleged humans there would mean exposing them to thousands of Council personnel, potentially causing galaxy-wide panic if word spread. On the other hand, if they really were humans, and if they really had defeated the Devourers, then they might be the galaxy's only hope. Helios Base is 2 hours spinward, he said finally. I'll transmit the coordinates and contact them to expect you. Much appreciated, Admiral. Oh, and one more thing. Chen's voice carried that hint of amusement again. You might want to warn them that we don't exactly look like most species they're used to treating. We're what you might call aggressively bilateral. Some of your medical staff might find us unsettling. As the human ship began moving toward Helios Base, its damaged engines leaving a trail of exotic particles that made Zexai's sensors screech in protest, the Admiral found himself staring at the tactical display and wondering if his ordered universe was about to change forever. Behind him, Velenar was already opening channels to Council Command, his voice shaking as he prepared to deliver a report that no one would believe. Thekmos was running calculations on her personal tablet, apparently trying to determine how a species could develop interstellar travel without quantum manipulation. And somewhere in the back of Zexai's mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his old combat instructor was whispering the opening lines of an ancient legend. When the humans walk among the stars again, the galaxy itself will tremble. For they are chaos given form, hope wrapped in violence, and the only force in the universe that fights hardest when all hope is lost. He had always assumed it was just a poem. The human ship disappeared in a hyperspace with a sound that no ship should make, a deep, thrumming noise that seemed to vibrate through the hull of every Zephyrian vessel in the fleet. As the last echoes faded, Zexhai realized that his hands were shaking. 47,000 ships, an entire human fleet coming to his galaxy. The legends were about to become very, very real. Dr. Cassandra had seen every possible form of biological trauma in her 6 decades of service at Helios Base Medical Station. She had treated radiation burns that had turned crystalline beings into walking prisms. She had reattached limbs for species that could regrow them in a matter of hours. She had even performed surgery on a gaseous collective, somehow managing to hold their constituent particles together long enough to repair damage to their quantum coherence matrix. But nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for the call she received from Admiral Zexhai. Humans, she had repeated, certain she had misheard. As in the mythical humans? The ones from the old war stories. I'm afraid so, Doctor. They're real. They're coming to your station, and they have wounded. Now, 2 hours later, Cassandra stood in her primary treatment bay, watching the most impossible thing she had ever seen dock with her station. The human ship, the Indomitable, they called it, was even more disturbing up close than it had appeared in the long-range scans. It was clearly damaged, but it moved with a purposeful efficiency that spoke of experienced crew and reliable systems despite its battered appearance. More unsettling were the humans themselves. The first one through the airlock was Captain Chun, and Cassandra immediately understood why the human had warned Admiral Zexhai about their appearance. Chun was aggressively bilateral in a way that made Cassandra's medical training scream warnings. Humans had only 2 eyes, positioned on the front of their heads in a configuration that suggested a predator species. They walked on only 2 legs, leaving their upper limbs free for manipulation and combat. Most disturbing of all, they displayed their teeth when they were pleased, an expression that every civilized species recognized as a threat display. Chun was doing it right now. Dr. Cassandra, the human asked, somehow pronouncing the Zephyrian name correctly despite having vocal cords that seemed designed for entirely different sounds. I'm Captain Sarah Chun. Thank you for agreeing to treat our wounded. Cassandra's gill slits fluttered nervously as she gestured toward the treatment base. Of course, Captain. It is our duty to provide medical aid regardless of origin. Chen's facial expression shifted into what Cassandra hoped was gratitude rather than predatory satisfaction. I appreciate that more than you know, Doctor. Fair warning, though, human physiology is probably unlike anything you've dealt with before. That proved to be a massive understatement. The first wounded human they brought in was a young male named Torres, and Cassandra nearly activated emergency protocols just looking at him. The human circulatory system used iron-based hemoglobin, turning his internal fluids a deep red color that looked disturbingly like spilled blood. Worse, his cardiovascular system operated on a closed-loop principle, meaning that any breach would result in catastrophic pressure loss. His blood pressure is dropping, reported Nurse Felwyn, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. But I can't find a primary circulation node. That's because we don't have one, said another human. This one a female, wearing what appeared to be medical insignia. I'm Dr. Martinez, ship's physician. Humans have a 4-chamber pump centrally located in the thoracic cavity. Torres took shrapnel to the chest, punctured lung, and possible cardiac involvement. Cassandra stared at the readings streaming across her diagnostic displays. The injured human's vital signs made no sense according to any known biological model. His brain showed electrical activity patterns that should have indicated severe neurological damage. Yet he was conscious and responding normally. His skeletal structure was dense enough to stop most forms of energy weapons, yet somehow flexible enough to allow rapid movement. Most incomprehensibly, his muscle tissue was laced with redundant systems that seemed designed for emergency operation under extreme stress. Dr. Martinez said gently, "I know this is confusing. Human physiology evolved under very different pressures than most species. We're basically walking disaster response systems." As if to prove her point, Torres suddenly sat up on the treatment table despite having a punctured lung and possible heart damage. "Doc," he said to Martinez, his voice slightly breathless but otherwise normal, "how long until I can get back to duty?" Cassandra's 7 eyes widened in shock. Any other species with comparable injuries would be unconscious, possibly dying. Torres was asking about returning to work. "You'll be down for at least a week," Martinez told him firmly. "Maybe longer if we can't get that lung properly healed." Torres made a sound that might have been disappointment. "The fleet's only 6 hours out, document. If the Devourers follow us here, then someone else will handle it," Chen said from the doorway. The human captain had been watching the medical procedures with interest, apparently unfazed by seeing her crew members' bright red circulatory fluid being displayed on diagnostic screens. "That's why we brought 47,000 ships instead of just one." The casual mention of their fleet size made Cassandra's gill slits flutter again. 47,000 vessels was larger than most species' entire military forces. If these humans were telling the truth about their numbers, they represented a military power unlike anything the current galaxy had seen. But it was the next patient that truly made Cassandra question everything she knew about biology. Commander Brooks was carried in on a stretcher, unconscious and apparently near death. According to Dr. Martinez, he had been exposed to vacuum for nearly 3 minutes during a hull breach, then subjected to radiation levels that should have been instantly fatal. Yet his brain was still active. "This is impossible," Cassandra muttered, studying the readings. Vacuum exposure causes rapid decompression in all known species. The cellular damage alone should be. "Humans are tougher than most species," Martinez said simply. "We evolve on a high-gravity world with an unstable atmosphere and frequent natural disasters. Our bodies are designed to keep functioning under conditions that would kill most other life forms." As if to demonstrate, Brooks suddenly opened his eyes and tried to sit up. "Report," he said clearly, despite having been clinically dead according to every standard medical definition. Chen moved to his side immediately. "Easy, Commander. You took a pretty good hit. How do you feel?" Brooks considered this question seriously. "Like I got kicked by a mule and then run over by a truck," he said finally. "So, about normal for Tuesday. What's our status?" Cassandra stared at the human in fascination and horror. Not only was Brooks conscious and coherent after exposure to vacuum and fatal radiation, he was displaying what appeared to be a sense of humor about his condition. In her experience, species that survived near-death trauma were either grateful to be alive or traumatized by the experience. They didn't make jokes. The third patient changed Cassandra's understanding of humans entirely. Sergeant Kim was brought in with what Dr. Martinez described as minor injuries, a shattered arm, severe burns across 30% of her body, and a concussion that had left her briefly unconscious. According to the incident report, she had been caught in an explosion while rescuing 2 other crew members from a damaged compartment. What made Kim remarkable wasn't her injuries. It was what she had done after receiving them. She continued fighting for another 20 minutes after the explosion, Dr. Martinez explained as they worked on Kim's burns. Took out 3 Devourer boarding parties single-handed before our security teams could reach her. Cassandra paused in her treatment. She fought? With these injuries? Kim opened one unburned eye and looked directly at Cassandra. Doc, you should see what the other guys look like. That was when Cassandra realized what she was dealing with. These weren't just tough predators. They were a species that had weaponized their own capacity for survival. Every human adaptation she had observed wasn't just for enduring trauma. It was for continuing to function as a combat unit, even while severely damaged. They were built for war. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, as Cassandra watched Dr. Martinez work alongside her staff to treat patients who by all rights should have been dead, she found herself feeling something she hadn't experienced in cycles: hope. Dr. Martinez, she said as they finished treating Kim's burns, may I ask about these devourers? The ones your species has been fighting. Martinez's expression grew grim. Hive mind, completely hostile technology that adapts faster than most species can react to it. They consume everything: organic matter, metal, energy. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't stop until everything in their path is gone. And you've defeated them? Not defeated. Slowed them down, cost them enough ships to make them reconsider their approach. But they're regrouping, and when they come back, they'll be ready for everything we threw at them last time. Cassandra felt a chill run through her gill slits. Then, why are you here? If your galaxy is still under threat. It was Captain Chun who answered from across the treatment bay. Because, Doctor, the Devourers don't just consume one galaxy and stop. They're heading this way next. We came to warn you and to offer our help. Your help. Cassandra looked around the treatment bay, at the humans who were joking and planning their return to duty despite injuries that should have been fatal. What exactly can 47,000 ships do against a force that threatens entire galaxies? Chen's expression shifted into that unsettling display of teeth again. Dr. Cassandra, you're thinking about this wrong. The question isn't what 47,000 human ships can do. The question is what we're willing to do. Torres, who had been listening from his treatment bed, laughed softly. Doc, you've got to understand. Humans don't fight wars to win. We fight wars to make sure nobody else has to. Brooks nodded agreement from his bed. The Devourers made one mistake when they hit our space. They assumed we'd run like every other species they'd encountered. Instead, we dug in and reminded them that some species don't back down even when they should. Kim, still recovering from her burns, added her voice to the conversation. They're about to learn that same lesson about this galaxy, whether they like it or not. As Cassandra watched her patients, these impossible, broken, deadly humans who refused to stay down, she began to understand why their species had become legends. They weren't just warriors. They were the embodiment of defiance itself, a living reminder that sometimes the universe's most dangerous creatures were the ones who refused to accept that some fights couldn't be won. Outside the medical bay's viewports, she could see other human ships beginning to arrive. Each one was as battered and patched as the Indomitable, and each one moved with the same purposeful confidence. 47,000 ships, crewed by beings who treated near-death experiences as minor inconveniences and fought wars not for conquest, but for the right to protect others. The galaxy was about to change, Cassandra realized. The humans were here, and they had brought their war with them. But for the first time in cycles, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Alliance had been designed to accommodate the greatest diversity of sentient life in the known universe. Its vast crystalline dome could adjust its atmospheric composition for over 3,000 different species, Its gravity generators could create zones of varied attraction, and its acoustic systems could translate between languages that had no common conceptual framework. But in its 4 million-year history, it had never faced a situation quite like this. Counselor Prime Veltar of the ethereal conclave floated at the center of the chamber, her energy form crackling with barely contained anxiety. Around her, representatives from 43 different species filled their designated zones, all talking at once in a cacophony of languages, bioelectrical discharges, and quantum resonance patterns. The source of their agitation hung in holographic display above them all, the human fleet. What had started as one battered ship had become 47,000 vessels distributed throughout Zephyrian space. Each ship bore the scars of hard fighting, yet each one moved with the disciplined precision of an experienced military force. They had arrived in waves over the past 12 hours, and, with each new group, the galaxy's understanding of what they were facing had grown more complex. Order! Veltar's voice resonated across multiple dimensional frequencies, finally bringing quiet to the chamber. We are here to address the situation in Sector 7 Gamma. Counselor Zexhai of Zephyros Prime, present your report. Admiral Zexhai, hastily promoted to counselor status for this emergency session, activated his personal holocaster. The image of Captain Sarah Chun appeared above his station, and a ripple of unease passed through the assembled beings. Honorable counselors, Zexhai began, his voice carefully controlled. 12 hours ago, my fleet encountered the UES Indomitable, claiming to be crewed by humans from Earth. After initial contact, I directed them to Helios Medical Station, where their wounded were treated by Dr. Cassandra. Counselor Thek of the crystalline sovereignty vibrated at a frequency that indicated deep skepticism. Admiral, are you asking us to believe that a mythical species has suddenly appeared in our galaxy with a military force larger than most of our member civilizations possess? I'm not asking you to believe anything, Counselor. I'm reporting observed facts. Dr. Cassandra, who treated the human wounded, is standing by to give her own testimony. The medical bay's holographic display activated, showing Dr. Cassandra surrounded by the now familiar forms of her human patients. Torres was sitting up in bed, apparently arguing with Dr. Martinez about his discharge time. Brooks was doing what appeared to be exercises despite his recent exposure to vacuum. Kim was demonstrating some kind of close combat technique to a group of fascinated Zephyrian medical staff. Counselors, Dr. Cassandra said, her gill slits fluttering nervously. I have treated thousands of species over my career. These humans, they're unlike anything in our medical databases. Their physiology is designed for survival under extreme conditions. They recover from trauma that would be fatal to most species, and they do it while remaining combat effective. Counselor Mesh of the Hive Collective spoke through his primary drone, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of calculation. Doctor, are you suggesting these beings are biologically superior to current galactic species? Not superior. Different. They appear to have evolved under extremely hostile conditions. Every system in their bodies has redundancy. They can function with significant damage to organs that would incapacitate other species. The chamber erupted in discussion again. Some voices carried fear, others curiosity, but underlying it all was a thread of disbelief. Humans were myths. They had to be. It was Counselor Prime Veltar who noticed the new arrival first. The human ship that materialized outside the station was unlike any that had come before. Where the others had been warships, scarred and patched from recent fighting, this vessel was clearly a diplomatic transport. It was sleek, elegant, and obviously constructed for interaction with other species rather than combat. Most importantly, it was broadcasting a request for permission to address the council. It seems, Veltar announced, that the humans wish to speak for themselves. 20 minutes later, the council found themselves facing something no galactic leader had encountered in recorded history: an actual human diplomat. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching the shoulder height of most council species. But as she walked into the chamber, accompanied by a security detail that moved with the fluid precision of experienced soldiers, every being present felt the weight of her presence. She was quite simply the most dangerous-looking sentient many of them had ever seen. Like all humans, she was aggressively bilateral, with two forward-facing eyes that seemed to track every movement in the chamber simultaneously. Her vocal cords produced sounds that carried emotional undertones in a range that most species found unsettling. Most disturbing of all, she seemed completely relaxed in a room filled with beings who could kill her in dozens of different ways. "Honorable counselors," Vasquez began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "My name is Elena Vasquez, Ambassador Extraordinary of the United Earth Systems. I'm here to discuss a threat to this galaxy and to offer our assistance in facing it." Council Amesh's primary drone stepped forward. "Ambassador, our records indicate that humans were expelled from this galaxy approximately 10,000 standard cycles ago. Why have you returned?" Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something in her stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Every human in her security detail made the same subtle adjustment, and suddenly, the chamber felt much more dangerous. "Counselor, we left because we were asked to leave. We've spent the last 10,000 years exploring other galaxies, establishing colonies, building new civilizations. We've learned a great deal in our travels." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled beings, including how to recognize an extinction-level threat when we see one. Veltar's energy form pulsed with curiosity. "The Devourers?" "Yes. We've been fighting them for the past 50 standard years. They appeared in our space 5 decades ago and have been systematically consuming everything in their path ever since. We've managed to slow them down, cost them enough resources to make them reconsider their approach, but they're adapting." "And you believe they're coming here?" asked Counselor Thek. Vasquez activated a portable holographic projector, filling the chamber with a 3-dimensional map of local galactic space. Red markers indicated known Devourer incursions, and the pattern was clear. They were moving in a straight line toward the Council's galaxy. "Not believe, Counselor." "No. Our scouts have confirmed that they're massing ships at the galactic edge. Conservative estimates suggest they'll begin their assault within 6 standard months." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. The Devourers were real. They were coming, and, according to this human, the galaxy had 6 months to prepare for an enemy that had been fighting the mythical humans for 50 years. "Ambassador," Veltar said carefully, "assuming your intelligence is accurate, what do you propose we do? If the Devourers have been fighting your entire species for 50 years, what can our individual civilizations possibly do against them?" Vasquez smiled, and every being in the chamber felt their threat assessment systems activate simultaneously. The expression was predatory in a way that transcended species barriers. "Counselor Prime, you're thinking about this wrong. The Devourers have been fighting humans for 50 years, and we're still here. They adapt to our tactics, so we develop new ones. They build bigger ships, so we build faster ones. They try to overwhelm us with numbers, so we remind them that sometimes quality matters more than quantity." She gestured to the holographic display, highlighting several areas where Devourer advance have been stopped. Every one of these positions represents a battle where humans chose to stand and fight rather than retreat. The Devourers expected us to run like every other species they'd encountered. Instead, we dug in and reminded them that some fights are worth losing everything for. Counselor Mesh's calculations were running at maximum capacity. Ambassador, are you suggesting that a single species has been holding back a galactic scale threat for 50 years? Not a single species, Counselor. Humans. Vasquez's expression grew serious. And now we're here to offer our experience to this galaxy. The Devourers are coming whether you accept our help or not. But with our assistance, you have a chance to survive what's coming. And what exactly are you offering? Feck's crystalline form resonated with suspicion. Vasquez's smile returned, wider than before. Everything we've learned about fighting impossible odds. Every tactic we've developed for facing an enemy that adapts faster than most species can think. Every strategy we've created for winning wars that can't be won. She gestured toward the chamber's viewports, where the human fleet was clearly visible. 47,000 ships, counselors, each one crewed by humans who've been fighting the Devourers for their entire adult lives. Each one equipped with weapons and defenses that have been tested in 50 years of continuous warfare. The security detail behind her shifted slightly, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with the presence of beings who had spent decades fighting an enemy that consumed worlds. They weren't just soldiers. They were veterans of a war that had been going on longer than most council species' recorded histories. But more than that, Vasquez continued, we're offering you something that no other species in either galaxy has, proof that the Devourers can be fought. They're not unstoppable. They're not invincible. They're just another enemy. And enemies can be defeated if you're willing to pay the price. Veltar's energy form dimmed as she processed this information. And what price have humans paid? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on every being in the chamber. Counselor Prime, we've lost 12 colonies, 43 billion civilians, and more soldiers than I care to count. We've sacrificed entire fleets to buy time for evacuations. We've watched worlds burn because saving them would have cost us the war itself. She paused, letting the magnitude of those numbers sink in. But we're still here. Our colonies rebuild. Our children grow up knowing they're part of something worth fighting for. And our soldiers wake up every morning ready to face an enemy that most species would consider a nightmare. Because that's what humans do. We endure, we adapt, and we refuse to quit even when quitting would be the smart choice. The chamber was absolutely silent now. 43 species, representing billions of sentient beings, were confronted with the reality that a single species had been holding back galactic annihilation for 50 years while they had continued their peaceful existence in ignorance. The question before you, Vasquez said finally, is simple. Do you want to face the Devourers alone, with whatever preparations you can make in 6 months? Or do you want to face them with allies who've been fighting them since before some of your civilizations achieved spaceflight? Counselor Mesh's primary drone spoke first. What would you require from us? Coordination, communication, the willingness to fight as hard for your neighbors as you would for yourselves. And most importantly, the understanding that this war won't be won by any single species, no matter how advanced they are. Veltar pulsed with decision-making frequencies. Ambassador, if we were to accept your offer of alliance, what assurance do we have that humans won't attempt to dominate galactic civilization as they did 10,000 years ago? Vasquez looked directly at the ethereal counselor, her human eyes meeting whatever passed for Veltar's visual organs. Counselor Prime, 10,000 years ago, humans were young, aggressive, and convinced we knew what was best for the galaxy. We've learned better. We've seen what real threats look like. We've fought enemies that make our ancient ambitions look like children's games. She gestured toward her security detail. These soldiers have spent their lives fighting to protect species they've never met, in galaxies they'll never see again. They're not here for conquest or glory. They're here because somebody has to stand between the darkness and the light, and humans have never been able to walk away from that kind of responsibility. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Veltar spoke again. We will need time to consult with our individual governments. Of course. But Counselor Prime, the Devourers won't wait for your deliberations to conclude. Every day we spend in debate is a day they use to prepare for their assault. As the council session adjourned and the various representatives began the process of contacting their home governments, Ambassador Vasquez and her security detail remained in the chamber. Through the viewports, the human fleet hung in space like a promise or a threat, depending on one's perspective. The galaxy was about to make a choice that would determine the fate of trillions of sentient beings. And for the first time in its history, that choice involved trusting a species that had become legend precisely because they were too dangerous to be allowed to remain. 3 weeks after the Council's emergency session, the Kepler Defense Platform had become something no galactic facility had ever been before, a joint human council military installation. What had started as a standard defensive station orbiting the Kepler system's primary star was now a bustling hub of activity where 43 different species worked alongside humans to prepare for what everyone hoped would never come. Commander Elena Santos of the UES Defiance stood in the platform's primary tactical center, watching the controlled chaos with a mixture of professional satisfaction and barely contained amazement. Around her, beings she had only read about in historical databases worked side by side with human tactical specialists to design defensive strategies for an enemy that most of them had never seen. To her left, a crystalline sovereignty tactical officer named Shard was working with Lieutenant Martinez to design overlapping fields of fire for the platform's defensive batteries. The crystalline's ability to process multiple probability matrices simultaneously complemented the human's intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. To her right, Dr. Cassandra was collaborating with Chief Medical Officer Patterson to establish treatment protocols for species that might be injured in the coming conflict. The Zephyrians' extensive knowledge of galactic biology combined with human emergency medicine, was producing medical procedures that could potentially save lives no other approach would reach. But it was the sight across the tactical center that made Santos smile despite the gravity of their situation. Sergeant Kim, the human who had fought for 20 minutes with severe injuries during their escape from Devourer space, was teaching close-quarter combat techniques to a mixed group of Council security personnel. Her students included 2 Hive Collective drones, a gaseous being who had somehow managed to achieve solid enough cohesion to participate, and what appeared to be a living crystal formation that served as the Ethereal Conclave's military liaison. The key thing to remember, Kim was saying as she demonstrated a defensive posture, is that most species think in terms of optimal positioning and tactical advantage. Devourers don't. They think in terms of overwhelming force applied until resistance stops. So conventional defensive strategies don't work. One of the Hive drones, its mechanical voice carrying undertones of curiosity, asked, "How does one counter overwhelming force?" Kim's grin was predatory in a way that made several of the alien observers step back involuntarily. By being so irrationally aggressive that they start worrying about their own survival instead of your destruction. She moved into what humans called a combat stance, weight balanced, arms positioned for both defense and instant retaliation. Devourers expect you to defend, retreat, and eventually break. They don't expect you to advance into their fire, absorb their attack, and keep coming anyway. The ethereal liaison, a being of pure energy named Flux, resonated with frequencies that translated as deep concern. Sergeant, such tactics seem suicidal. Sometimes they are, Kim admitted cheerfully. But here's the thing about humans. We'd rather die fighting than live on our knees. And once an enemy realizes you're perfectly willing to pay any price to stop them, they start making mistakes. Santos watched the exchange with professional interest. Kim was teaching more than combat techniques. She was introducing council species to the human concept of acceptable losses in service of larger goals. It was a mindset that most galactic civilizations found difficult to understand, having evolved in relatively stable environments where survival always took precedence over abstract principles. Commander Santos, a voice behind her said, "Your tactical assessment, please." Santos turned to find Admiral HFY approaching with what appeared to be his entire senior staff. The Zephyrian admiral had been spending most of his time since the council meeting trying to understand how humans thought about warfare, and the process seemed to be giving him permanent gill flutter. "Admiral," Santos replied, gesturing toward the tactical displays, "integration is proceeding ahead of schedule. Your people are fast learners, and they're adapting human tactics to their own capabilities better than we expected." "Yes, but are we ready?" Zexai's question carried the weight of someone who understood that billions of lives might depend on the answer. Santos considered the question seriously. Around the tactical center, hundreds of beings were working with a coordination that should have been impossible. Species that had never interacted directly were sharing tactical data. Military traditions that had developed in complete isolation were being merged into unified strategies. Most remarkably, it was actually working. "No," she said finally. "We're not ready. But, Admiral, nobody ever is ready for something like this. The question isn't whether we're prepared for every possibility. It's whether we can adapt fast enough when our preparations prove inadequate." Before Zexai could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the platform. The tactical displays immediately shifted to long-range sensor arrays, and what they showed made every being in the tactical center fall silent. The Devourers had arrived. They came not as a single fleet, but as a wave of destruction that stretched across light years of space. The sensor readings were almost incomprehensible. Millions of ships, ranging from fighters barely larger than shuttlecraft to dreadnoughts that massed more than some moons. They moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind, flowing around obstacles like water while maintaining perfect formation discipline. "Dear Creator," whispered Dr. Cassandra, her 7 eyes wide with terror as she stared at the display. "How many ships are there?" Lieutenant Martinez, his human calm unshaken by the impossible sight, was already running calculations. "Conservative estimate? 12 million vessels. Probably closer to 15 million when you account for the smaller units our sensors can't distinguish." The tactical center erupted in what sounded like control panic. Representatives from species that had never seen warfare on this scale began activating emergency protocols. Some were calling for evacuation. Others were demanding immediate retreat to core systems. It was Commander Santos whose voice cut through the chaos. "Attention, all stations. This is exactly what we trained for." The simple statement somehow restored order to the tactical center. Every being present, human, Zephyrian, crystalline, ethereal, and dozens of others, turned their attention to the small human officer who was addressing them with complete confidence in the face of overwhelming odds. "Yes, There are more of them than we expected. Yes, they're coming faster than our optimal timeline suggested. Yes, the odds are approximately 15 million to 1 against us. Santos paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled beings. These are what humans call target-rich conditions. The humans in the tactical center, doctors, engineers, tacticians, and soldiers, responded with expressions that ranged from grim satisfaction to outright anticipation. The council species watched this reaction with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. Admiral Zex High, Santos continued, please signal all council fleets to implement Defensive Protocol Gamma. Dr. Cassandra, activate all medical stations for mass casualty events. Sergeant Kim, deploy your close combat teams to potential boarding zones. As the orders were carried out with efficient precision, Santos opened a communication channel to the human fleet. All human vessels, this is Kepler Defense Command. The party is about to start. Remember, we're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to make sure our new friends learn what happens when someone threatens their families. The response from the human fleet was immediate and unambiguous. 47,000 human vessels began moving into attack positions with a coordination that spoke of decades of experience fighting impossible odds. They didn't move like a retreating force or even a defensive one. They moved like predators who had just spotted their prey. Ambassador Vasquez, who had been observing the proceedings from the diplomatic section, activated her personal communicator. Commander Santos, are you seriously planning to attack 15 million enemy vessels with the forces we have available? Santos's smile was visible even over the communication link. Ambassador, you're still thinking about this wrong. We're not attacking 15 million enemy vessels. She gestured toward the tactical display, where the Devourer fleet was spreading out in the standard formation they had used to consume dozens of worlds. We're attacking 15 million enemy vessels that have never faced an opponent crazy enough to advance into their fire, adapt to their tactics in real time, and keep fighting even after conventional logic says the battle is lost. As if to emphasize her point, the first wave of Devourer ships reached the edge of the Kepler system's defensive perimeter. Instead of the coordinated withdrawal they had come to expect from galactic civilizations, they were met by something unprecedented in their experience. A mixed force of human and council vessels charging directly toward them at maximum velocity. The lead ship in the attacking formation was the UES Indomitable, Captain Chen's scarred and patched vessel that had started this entire chain of events. As it opened fire on Devourer ships that massed 10 times its tonnage, Chen's voice echoed across the communication channels. All vessels, this is Captain Chen. Today we're fighting for people who trusted legends they'd never seen to keep them safe from nightmares they'd never imagined. Let's make sure they know their trust was well placed. The battle for Kepler's system had begun. Around Commander Santos, beings from 43 different species worked with focused precision to coordinate a defense that no single civilization could have mounted. Crystalline Sovereignty tactical officers calculated targeting solutions for weapons they'd never seen. Ethereal conclave energy beings coordinated shield harmonics with human engineers. Hive Collective drones processed battlefield data alongside human tactical computers. And through it all, the humans moved with the calm efficiency of a species that had spent 50 years learning how to fight enemies that should have been unbeatable. They didn't fight like they were trying to win. They fought like they were teaching a lesson about what happened when someone threatened their friends. The Devourers, for the first time in their species' history, found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the battle intensified rather than less. Each tactical adaptation they deployed was met by immediate counter-adaptations. Each overwhelming assault was absorbed and redirected. Each attempt to break the enemy's morale only seemed to make their resistance stronger. Most disturbing of all, their opponents seemed to be enjoying themselves. On the bridge of the lead Devourer vessel, the Hive Queen's Tactical Analysis Center was producing results that contradicted everything in their species' extensive military database. The enemy was outnumbered 15 million to 1, had taken casualties that should have caused complete unit breakdown, and was somehow advancing into Devourer fire while maintaining perfect coordination. According to every tactical model the Devourers possessed, the enemy should have been destroyed within the first 10 minutes of engagement. Instead, after 2 hours of continuous fighting, it was the Devourers who were beginning to retreat. Commander Santos watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction as Devourer formations began pulling back from their advanced positions. Around her, the integrated Human Council command structure was functioning with an efficiency that exceeded even her most optimistic projections. "Admiral Zexhai," she said, "your thoughts on our new tactics?" The Zephyrian Admiral's gill slits were fluttering in what Santos had learned was his species' equivalent of amazed laughter. "Commander, 3 weeks ago, I thought humans were myths. Today I watched them teach 15 million hostiles that some myths are more dangerous than reality." Dr. Cassandra, monitoring casualty reports from the medical bay, looked up from her displays. "Commander, I'm seeing something unprecedented. Our injury rates are actually lower than projected for this level of engagement. That's the advantage of fighting alongside beings who refuse to stay down when they're hit," Santos replied. "Hard to inflict permanent casualties on people who treat near-death experiences as minor inconveniences." As the Devourer fleet continued its withdrawal, Santos opened a communication channel to all vessels, human and Council alike. "All stations, this is Kepler Defense Command. The enemy is withdrawing, but this was just the first wave. They'll be back with different tactics and better intelligence about our capabilities." She paused, looking around the tactical center of beings who had just proven that cooperation between mythical humans and practical council species could achieve things that neither could accomplish alone. But when they come back, they'll be facing something they've never encountered before. An enemy that gets stronger when attacked, more coordinated under pressure, and absolutely refuses to quit no matter what the odds. The humans in the tactical center smiled with predatory satisfaction. The council species observed this reaction and felt something they hadn't experienced in generations: confidence in the face of impossible odds. Outside the platform's viewports, the combined Human Council fleet held its positions, ready for whatever came next. 47,000 human vessels flew alongside Council ships in formations that had been impossible 3 weeks earlier and were now becoming standard tactical doctrine. The legends had become allies, and the galaxy was about to learn what that meant for anyone foolish enough to threaten it. 6 months after the first battle of Kepler's system, the galaxy had changed in ways that no historian would ever be able to fully document. The Human Council Alliance had grown from a desperate necessity into something unprecedented, a true galactic confederation where 43 species worked together not out of political convenience, but out of shared understanding that some things were worth fighting for. Admiral Sarah Chun, promoted from captain after her role in establishing First Contact, stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the final preparations for what everyone hoped would be the decisive battle of the war. Around her, the largest military force in galactic history prepared to face an enemy that had spent 6 months learning that humans were every bit as dangerous as the legends claimed. The Devourers had not been idle during their retreat. Intelligence reports suggested they had spent the time rebuilding their forces, adapting their tactics, and, most concerning of all, modifying their technology specifically to counter human strategies. They were coming back with 15 million ships that had been designed to fight humans. They were also coming back to face a galaxy that had learned to fight like humans. Admiral, reported Commander Santos from the tactical station, all fleet elements report ready for engagement. Total force strength: 47,000 human vessels, 86,000 council ships, and approximately 12 million individual fighters and support craft. Chen nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the combined fleet in formations that would have been impossible before humans returned to this galaxy. Zephyrian vessels flew wing to wing with human destroyers. Crystalline sovereignty ships provided computational support for ethereal conclave energy weapons. Hive Collective drones coordinated with human fighter squadrons in attack patterns that merged the best of both species' tactical doctrines. Most remarkably, it was working perfectly. Dr. Patterson, Chun said, addressing the fleet's chief medical officer. Final casualty projections? Patterson's expression was grim, but confident. Admiral, based on engagement patterns from the past 6 months, we're looking at approximately 60% casualties across all fleet elements. However, with the integrated medical protocols Dr. Cassandra helped develop, we expect 75% of those casualties to return to duty within standard recovery periods. The casual discussion of such massive casualties would have horrified most species. But over the past 6 months, the Council civilizations had learned something that humans had known for generations. Sometimes the only way to prevent unacceptable losses was to accept heavy casualties in pursuit of decisive victory. Admiral Chun, a voice said behind her, "The fleet is requesting final tactical briefing." Chun turned to find Ambassador Vasquez, approaching with a group that represented the most unlikely military command structure in galactic history. Admiral Zexhai of the Zephyrian Fleet flew alongside General Mesh of the Hive Collective. Dr. Cassandra, now serving as Fleet Medical Coordinator, walked beside Sergeant Kim, who had been promoted to colonel after her success in training Council close combat specialists. Behind them came representatives from 30 other species, all wearing the integrated command insignia that had become the symbol of the Human Council Alliance. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Chun began activating the fleet-wide communication system. In approximately 1 hour, we will engage the largest devourer force ever assembled. Intelligence suggests they have modified their tactics specifically to counter human strategies and have equipped their ships with weapons designed to exploit human physiological weaknesses. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled commanders. They've spent 6 months learning how to fight humans. Unfortunately for them, we spent 6 months teaching our allies to fight like humans. The response from the fleet was immediate and overwhelming. 47,000 human ships activated their combat systems with the precision of a species that had been fighting impossible odds for 50 years. 86,000 council vessels followed suit, their crews trained by humans in the art of advancing into enemy fire rather than retreating from it. But it was the fighter squadrons that truly demonstrated how much the galaxy had changed. 12 million small craft launched from carrier ships and planetary bases, forming attack swarms that moved with coordinated precision. Human pilots flew alongside beings that communicated through electromagnetic pulses, quantum resonance, and bioelectrical fields. Somehow, impossibly, they had learned to fight as a single unified force. "All vessels," Chun announced, "remember what we're fighting for. We're not here to defeat the Devourers. We're here to teach the universe that some things cannot be consumed, cannot be broken, and cannot be stopped as long as people are willing to stand together." The Devourer fleet appeared at the edge of sensor range, exactly on schedule, moving with the same coordinated precision that had allowed them to consume worlds for millennia. But as they approached the Human Council force, something unprecedented happened. They slowed. For the first time in their species' history, the Devourers approached a battle with caution rather than overwhelming aggression. 6 months of fighting humans had taught them that some enemies became more dangerous when attacked, and they had modified their tactics accordingly. It was exactly the wrong approach to take against a force that included humans. Admiral, Commander Santos reported, Devourer fleet is maintaining defensive formation at maximum weapons range. They appear to be conducting detailed tactical analysis before engaging. Chun smiled, and every human on the bridge recognized the expression. They're thinking about this fight instead of just attacking. That means we've already won. She activated the fleet command frequency. All vessels, execute attack pattern human. Show them what happens when you give legends time to plan. What followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The Human Council fleet didn't advance in the steady, coordinated formations that the Devourers had learned to counter. Instead, they attacked in a pattern that seemed chaotic, but was actually an expression of 43 different species' tactical doctrines unified under human strategic thinking. Zephyrian vessels phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind Devourer formations before disappearing again. Crystalline ships created probability cascades that made their positions impossible to predict. Ethereal energy beings flowed through enemy shields as if they weren't there. Hive Collective drones swarmed in patterns that overwhelmed Devourer computational systems. And through it all, human ships advanced directly into enemy fire with the calm efficiency of beings who had spent decades perfecting the art of controlled aggression. The Devourers, despite their modifications and adaptations, found themselves facing something their hive mind couldn't process, an enemy that fought with perfect coordination despite using completely irrational tactics. Fleet tactical analysis, Chun called out. Devourer formations are beginning to break down, Santos reported. They're trying to adapt to 43 different tactical doctrines simultaneously. Their computational systems are reaching overload thresholds. Human casualties? 15% and falling. Council forces are performing beyond all projections. Shin nodded, watching as beings she had come to respect as both allies and friends proved that courage was not uniquely human. Zephyrian crews continued fighting even after their ships had taken damage that should have forced withdrawal. Crystalline warriors maintained their positions despite having their quantum matrices disrupted. Ethereal beings held battle formations even as enemy weapons disrupted their energy coherence. Most remarkably, they were all advancing. The entire Human Council fleet was moving forward into Devourer fire, absorbing casualties, adapting to enemy tactics, and somehow becoming more effective as the battle intensified. It was the most perfectly human thing that 42 non-human species had ever done. Admiral, Communications Officer Torres reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the Devourer fleet. It's unusual. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything anyone had ever heard from a Devourer. Instead of the cold, mechanical tones of a hive mind, it carried what sounded almost like uncertainty. Human Council forces, this is Hive Queen Primary. We request negotiation. The bridge fell silent. In 50 years of fighting Devourers, humans had never heard them request anything. They consumed, they adapted, they advanced. They did not negotiate. Hive Queen Primary, Chen replied, state your terms. We withdraw from this galaxy. We cease consumption activities in this region of space. We acknowledge that further engagement would be counterproductive. Chen looked around her bridge at the humans and council beings who had become family over the past 6 months. Beings who had learned to trust each other with their lives, who had proven that cooperation was possible between species that had evolved on different worlds under different stars. Hive Queen Primary, she said finally, withdrawal is acceptable. But understand this. This galaxy is under the protection of the Human Council Alliance. Any future incursions will be met with the same response you've encountered here. Acknowledged. We comprehend the nature of your resistance. It is outside our tactical parameters. As the Devourer fleet began its withdrawal, moving away from galactic space with the same coordinated precision they had used to attack it, Chen opened a channel to all Human Council vessels. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. The enemy is withdrawing. We have achieved victory not through superior firepower or better technology, but through something much more dangerous. The willingness to stand together when standing apart would be easier. She paused, looking out at a fleet that represented 43 species united in common cause. 6 months ago, humans were myths in this galaxy. Today, we're family. Tomorrow, we'll face whatever challenges come next as allies who have learned that some bonds are forged in fire and cannot be broken by anything the universe can create. The response from the fleet was overwhelming. Cheers, electronic harmonics, quantum resonances, and bioelectrical displays of triumph that created a symphony of victory across 43 different communication protocols. But it was Dr. Cassandra's voice that provided the perfect summation of what they had all experienced. Admiral Chen, the Zephyrian medical officer, said, "I have a question for you." "Go ahead, Doctor." "When this is over, when we've rebuilt our worlds and integrated our civilizations, what do we call this new galaxy we've created?" Chen smiled, watching human ships flying in formation with vessels from species that had been strangers 6 months ago and were now family. "Doctor, I think we call home." 3 years later, the Human Council Alliance had become the foundation for a new galactic civilization. Trade flowed freely between species that had never interacted before. Scientific collaboration produced breakthroughs that no single species could have achieved alone. Cultural exchange created art forms that transcended individual species' limitations. Most importantly, when new threats emerged, and they always did, the galaxy faced them with the unified response of beings who had learned that cooperation was not just possible, but essential for survival. On a quiet space station orbiting Earth, now serving as one of the Alliance's administrative centers, Admiral Chen sat in her office reviewing reports from 43 different worlds. Each report told the same story: civilizations working together, learning from each other, and building something greater than the sum of their parts. Ambassador Vasquez entered without announcement, carrying a data pad and wearing an expression of amused satisfaction. "Sarah," she said, settling into the visitor's chair, "I have the final casualty figures from the Devourer War." "How bad?" "Total Alliance losses, approximately 2 million personnel across all species. Total Devourer losses, their entire military capability, and their confidence in their own invincibility." She nodded slowly. "And the reconstruction efforts?" "Ahead of schedule on all fronts. Turns out that species who've learned to fight together are remarkably good at building together as well." Vasquez activated the data pad, showing images from across the galaxy. Human engineers working with crystalline architects to design buildings that existed in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Zephyrian artists collaborating with ethereal energy beings to create sculptures made of living light. Hive collective computational networks interfacing with human creativity to solve problems that neither could approach alone. Elena, Chun said quietly, do you think we did the right thing? Coming back to this galaxy, bringing our war with us. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Sarah, 3 years ago, this galaxy was 43 separate civilizations that barely interacted with each other. They were peaceful, advanced, and completely unprepared for any serious threat. She gestured toward the images on the datapad. Today, they're a unified alliance that has defeated an enemy that consumed galaxies. They've learned that peace is something you have to fight for, that cooperation requires courage, and that some things are worth any sacrifice to protect. Chin nodded, watching a particularly striking image of human children playing with young beings from a dozen different species in what had once been the council chamber. The Devourers taught us something too, Vasquez continued. They showed us that the universe has real threats, real dangers that can't be negotiated with or reasoned with. But they also showed us that those threats can be faced if you're willing to stand with people who share your values. Chun smiled, remembering a scarred and damaged ship called the Indomitable that had started this entire chain of events by asking for directions to the nearest medical station. The legends were right about one thing, she said finally. Humans really are dangerous, but they were wrong about why. We're not dangerous because we're violent or aggressive, Vasquez agreed. We're dangerous because we make friends easily, and we'll do anything to protect our friends. Outside the office windows, ships from 43 different species moved through space in formations that had become as natural as breathing. Human vessels flew alongside beings made of living crystal, sentient gas clouds, and pure energy. They moved with the coordination of family members who had learned to trust each other completely. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans. But more importantly, it had learned to hope like humans, with stubborn determination, infinite resilience, and the absolute conviction that any problem could be solved if enough people were willing to work together to solve it. The legends had been true after all. Humans really were everything the stories claimed. Dangerous, unpredictable, and utterly unwilling to back down from impossible odds. But the legends had missed the most important thing about humans. They were also loyal, compassionate, and constitutionally incapable of standing by while others suffered. The galaxy had thought it was getting mythical warriors when it accepted humanity's offer of alliance. Instead, it got something much more dangerous, a species that believed the universe could be better than it was and was willing to spend whatever time and effort necessary to make that belief a reality. The humans were home, and the galaxy would never be the same.